So many people these days are talking about the pelvic floor therapy, pelvic floor dysfunction, and some wonder, what is the pelvic floor and what does it do? Well, in today's discussion, I'm going to talk about the 5 main functions of the pelvic floor and also show where it's located. If you're new around here, thank you so much for coming here. My name is Dr. Kari Roberts. I'm the physical therapist here at Marone Pelvic Health, and today I'm diving into the 5 main functions of the pelvic floor. So there are a ton of things that the pelvic floor does, but just like I did in a couple of episodes back where I put things into buckets, in the pelvic floor world, we put things into 5 buckets. We actually call them the 5 S's of the pelvic floor, or the 5 functions of the pelvic floor. So just to run through them really quick, we have sphincter or sphincteric function, stability, support, sexual function, and sump pump. So that's it in a nutshell. Of course, I'm going to dig into it a little deeper, and this is primarily a podcast. Thank you for listening. If you are watching or have the option to watch, you may want to swing on over to YouTube because I've got my model here. Miss Phyllis the pelvis is my model, and I'm going to be using the model to explain a little bit throughout this discussion. Now, before we get into it, the first thing I want to do is actually talk about where the pelvic floor is located. It is, if we're sitting on a chair, you're sitting on those sit bones which are part of the pelvis, okay? That's here. There's one on the left and one on the right. Then towards the front of that, we have our pubic bone. And then at the base of our spine, we have our sacrum, which is also known as the tailbone, and then the coccyx. So if you're sitting in a chair and someone was going to look right underneath the chair, or if you're watching the video and you want to look at the pelvis, we're going to look at it right there. So we've got the pubic bone here, we've got the sacrum and the coccyx here, and then we have our sit bones here in those 2 places. And that diamond shape between the 2 sit bones, the pubic bone and the sacrum and coccyx, is where the pelvic floor lives. It's called the pelvic floor because it is at the bottom. It is the bottom of our core, or the floor of our core. A lot of times people refer to the diaphragm as the ceiling of our core. The pelvic floor is the floor of our core. So the first thing that it does is it has sphincteric function. So a sphincter is a muscle that is round shaped, and when it tightens, it closes up, doesn't let contents pass through, and when it relaxes, it opens up and contents can pass through. We have sphincters all over our body, and the 2 that we're going to talk about today are part of the pelvic floor. We have a sphincter around the urethra, which controls bladder function, and then we have a sphincter around the anus, which gives us our bowel support. So that's one of the S's, sphincteric function. The next one is support. Now, this is, the pelvic floor muscles live on the inside of our hip girdle, and it's shaped kind of like a bowl. Okay, so just like a bowl, you put cereal in the bowl. In the pelvic floor, in that bowl, we have organs in there. We've got our rectum towards the back. You have the bladder towards the front. And for women, we have our uterus, our uterus and our vagina in the middle. And it gives those organs support, right? It's a bowl. It's shaped kind of like a hammock. I'm trying to show you, there we go. It's shaped kind of like a hammock, and it gives support to the bowels, the bladder, the urethra, and the vagina. And when it's supporting well, you really don't think about it. If you have any issues with support, then you might develop something like a bladder prolapse, a rectocele, or a cystocele. So that's the second function. The third function is stability. Notice I said it lives inside the pelvic girdle. It is between our hip bones, and it gives stability. Our pelvic floor attaches to our spine back here. It attaches to our hip bones in the front and on the sides, and it even shares some connective tissue with other muscles in our spine. So the pelvic floor helps give stability to our lower back, our hips, and it's very, very important. So stability is something we need. We need those muscles to give that secondary support to our hips and back when we're moving and lifting and things like that. The third thing that it gives us, or the third function of the pelvic floor, is actual sexual dysfunction. So when you think about things, when you have arousal, when you have pleasure, when you have climax, you have sensations associated with that. There's lubrication and things like that. All of that is going and controlling and functioning from the pelvic floor. When you have a climax or orgasm and you feel that rhythmic motion, that's the pelvic floor muscle doing what it needs to do so that you could have enjoyment and pleasure. So that is what it does from a sexual perspective. And then the last one, which I think is the most interesting, is actually the sump pump, because the sump pump helps us, or it's sump pump, but it's really helps with the lymphatic system. Our lymphatic system in our body eliminates waste product, and the pelvic floor helps the lymphatic system do that. So there are a ton of things that the pelvic floor does, but in a nutshell, it does those five S's: the sphincter function, sexual function, stability, support, and sump pump. So there you have it. Thank you for coming here. I would love for you to leave a comment. Please leave a review. Please subscribe so that you never miss a new episode. And I will be back next week to share more about the pelvic floor.